I wanted to talk a little bit today about some work that we've been doing with the University of California, San Francisco, and an emergent issue that's come out of that, and share what we've learned, and then also get your terrific feedback on where we might be able to go next with this. The question that we had is one about workplace research in general. I'll walk through that, talk a little bit about the team and how we structured what is now 3 research projects running in parallel, and then describe a little bit about this emergent issue on perception of loss and workplace satisfaction, and conclude with where we are on the initial results. So that should work. I'm just going to click through. At least I'm going to try to click through here. I know we tested this on Friday and went a little slow, so if I'm going too fast between the slides, just let me know.
Okay. It's taking a sec, but it looks like it will work just fine.
Okay, wonderful. So I know the context of the Buffalo Springfield song is probably somewhat of a hot button given today's political climate, but that's the way I kind of felt when we got to a certain point on this research journey where something was emergent and didn't quite make sense in terms of the answers we were getting back, and that's where we're going to go for the conclusion for today's conversation. I will put this in the full screen mode and see if I can get it to move a little faster. I'm having a bit of a delay on my side as well.
Oh, that works. Great. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. So first of all, acknowledgement on the team. It's a big team. Dr. Nancy Adler with Ucsf is the PI. We have a sizable team at Perkins and Will, both the folks who are doing the primary work as well as a group of peer reviewers. I think Eve may be there with you today, but a broader group of folks who are giving us a wonderful peer review. And then Gene Weinman with the University of Michigan, John Paponis with Georgia Tech, and of course Lindsay and Gail and team at the CBE. It kind of takes a village to tackle something this big. So again, thanks to CBE and the whole research team for the work that they put into this effort. The effort is actually over the last 3 years, starting in 2014, we were asked to look at a project which is named Mission Hall. And that has broadened to consider 3 research projects. Each of the research projects is focused on 4 categories of issues: satisfaction, well-being, work effectiveness, and engagement, as ways of looking at the relationship between the workplace as constructed or as currently occupied in pre-occupancy context, and whether or not that workplace is supportive of the work that people need to do. And some of you may have heard a little bit about Mission Hall. It was one of the first academic workplaces that used an entirely open office strategy, lots of support spaces in terms of huddle rooms, focus rooms, town centers, no faculty offices. So the research that came from that study was intended and generated through interest from the academic senate to say, is this really going to work for an academic environment? It's not a Google environment or the more corporate environments that you typically see activity-based workplace occurring. So that led to a second study, which is what we call the Building 33 study. Building 33 is actually a pre-occupancy. Mission Hall was both a pre- and post-occupancy. Building 33 is a pre-occupancy. We're basically taking what we've learned from Mission Hall and beginning to apply that to the pre-planning for what is Building 33. This will be a hybrid work environment with both offices and workstations, not one-to-one as faculty typically have seen, but with a hybrid, and of course with all of those additional support spaces that we had talked about previously, such as conference, huddle, focus rooms, etc. This project is in its early days, so the planning team is conducting initial research, talking with the different occupants of the future building. The design team is being onboarded at UCSF. They keep those things separate. And the master planning team is situating the building on the site. Then the third building is called Dsfg Research Building, which again is a hybrid workplace, but this time it adds the additional component of research labs. These studies are all near completion, but none are yet publicly available. So what we're presenting today are high-level findings, and once, as a public university, once UCSF and we complete the work on this, these will be available for your review. And I'm sure the group of folks in this room could give some great feedback to this research team. So the indicators, again, that we used were these 4, and the way that we began to think about these indicators were, as most of you who do any work in workplace research know, that it's kind of hard to tie a particular workplace aspect to a particular degree of satisfaction. You kind of go through a back door, right? But what we, in concert with Dr. Adler, looked at was the issue of satisfaction in general, personal satisfaction, morale issues, and well-being. We looked at the ways that people either have comfort between themselves and their physical environment or between themselves and their organizational environment, knowing that well-being is not the wellness conversation in totality, but looking more broadly at whether an organizational fit was in place. And in terms of work effectiveness, it was a pretty straightforward set of questions related to whether or not folks were able to do their work in the work environments they were provided. And lastly, it's about engagement, trying to understand the degree of attachment that the participants had to UCSF, the values that UCSF espouses, and the goals that their organizational unit had. So with those 4 indicators in mind, we set up a research program that has both a short-term and a long-term target. The short-term target was to conduct these studies to see what the issues are that are coming from a new strategy like Mission Hall, but also to think about how short-term capital projects might be improved through findings from this study, and that long-term capital projects might be better planned and implemented through findings from this study. So the intent at UCSF is to integrate research throughout the planning process and to use these findings in multiple ways. And this is actually central to what they do as an organization, which is very much tied to the Lean Sigma approach to design and construction. So the plan, do, check, adjust cycle is not one that was familiar to me, but it's one that is common to the UCSF team, which is to say, as you do the planning for any capital project, then do the design, the construction, the implementation. Do you look back on that, check your results, understand how to improve, and then adjust your next time around. The intent of this research as actionable research was to join that plan, do, check, adjust cycle, so that the findings, for example, from Mission Hall began to inform the planning for Building 33, the planning for Building 33 and Mission Hall results began to inform the planning for Dsfg and on, and then any small projects, small renovations that are happening in parallel can benefit from that as well. So what that's meant for the research team is that for each of these projects, we needed to establish a pre-occupancy baseline, but then also work with the planning team to look at the technical performance guidance that was being developed to act as almost like peer reviewers to them, and then to support the design teams when hired to act again as a peer reviewer, providing guidance to them based on the research findings. And then once occupied, to do the post-occupancy that all of you are quite familiar with, and then to work with the UCSF teams to integrate those lessons learned throughout the various parts of the design planning, the plan, do, check, adjust cycle. So UCSF has an intent to improve its overall process for providing work environments for its people. On the left side of the box, you can see the types of guiding principles that UCSF has in place. And these are, I think, unquestionably positive for all facets of what UCSF does. So supporting the improvement of health and the advancement of health cycles and improving the environments that people work in, making sure that the models that are tested can be used by everyone, getting efficiencies in where you can so that more money can be applied to research, making sure things work seamlessly, having healthy building strategies, and having a place that's good to be in. But when we looked at these from a research perspective, we said, how did those actually apply to the kind of workplace research that we need to do? So we looked at Criterion 1 and Criterion 2 to say these sound like they're really more about the way that the workplace supports the overall mission. So the measures that we began to ask about were productivity measures, collaboration metrics, and how recruiting and retention is watched and measured over time. For Criterion 3, it really sounded like it was more about the functions and the tools required to support the work. So we asked questions about support for work task, how collaboration happens, where it happens, the degree of satisfaction, and then any indicators tied to health and well-being. And then criteria 4 through 7 seem to be more about the principles of good buildings than about the success of the workplace in general. So for any project, you would expect these 4 criteria to be integrated. So what we were trying to do in this process, again, going back to that double loop learning cycle, is to say, how can we integrate the research in ways that ties back to what UCSF is trying to do and improve the overall cycle. And the tactics that we used are tactics I'm sure that all of you are familiar with: interviews and focus groups, using CVEs, working with Lindsay and team. We did some modifications to CVE survey, but they've been a real central partner in developing the surveys. And then and that's all participant engagement. And then without participant engagement, we added structured site observations at representative facilities for each of the 3 research projects, benchmarking to try to understand where, if anywhere, other academic institutions had tested and learned from using different kinds of workplaces to support their people, and doing time utilization studies just to try to get a baseline of how these environments, many of which were new to the occupants in general, particularly at Mission Hall, were either being used or not being used. The participation level, I would say, was okay initially with Mission Hall. Our target populations are on the top gray line, and you can see the number of volunteers. Again, this was a human subjects reviewed process, so it was all volunteer participation. So you can see the range of volunteers that we have with each of the projects by comparison to the target population that will be moving into the new buildings. And I think we had a bit of a tapering off as we got into the 3rd study. I'm not sure, it was 3 different sets of populations, but I'm not sure if folks who were within each population had more or less interest in being part of the research study, or if the way that we set up the research study running in parallel with some of the planning projects actually created confusion as, well, am I going to the programming meeting or am I going to the research meeting? If I have to choose, I'll go to this or that. So we have some lessons learned on the overall research design. But you can, again, see the stats from where this data was compiled. What did we find? The initial findings across the 3 studies identified 5 common areas of concern. And this was interesting because, again, Mission Hall, brand new building on the new Mission Bay campus. Building 33 pre-occupancy was pulling from a representative group of folks, the majority of the folks who would be moving to the new building, that they're in an old building at the Laurel Heights campus. And then the Dsfg teams were pulling from very, very old buildings on the Dsfg campus. But we did find 5 common areas of concerns that have opportunities for improvement for UCSF. The first area is about technology. There are opportunities consistent, and this is probably consistent with just about every workplace research project that we do. There are opportunities for greater technology integration, which is obvious, greater analysis of fit. So what is my technology toolkit? How does that work with what I need to be doing? And then training. How is this new toolkit that fits with the work that I need to be doing and the environment that's going to be built for me? How does that all fit together so that I can optimize the investments that are made? So on the one hand, with the new facility, we learned that there were more improvements that need to be made there. And on the other hand, with the 2 facilities being planned, we learned that there are significant opportunities for further refinement of how to approach technology outfit at the individual level and technology integration. Second issue is governance and policy. As many of you who are in academic environments currently may have departments have suites or suites within suites, and oftentimes the move from a suited environment to an open environment introduces new operational challenges. So who's going to run a building of 1,500 people when all of those 1,500 people are coming from 50 to 100 person suites, and they're used to having common spaces that are commonly controlled? Or who's going to manage the security for a new building when people are moving from a building that was central secured through the university system previously, and then have to think about it, now they have to think about it on an aggregate basis. So there were a number of governance and policy issues that came up across the three projects. When we look at the issues that relate to staff and faculty, we saw a number of issues related to group and social cohesion. So the relationships of staff to staff, or faculty to staff, or faculty to faculty, quite different. I'm sure that's not unique in the experiences that you've had either. But what we found, particularly within the post-occupancy of Mission Hall, was that when you move those relationships into an open office environment, you have the opportunity for some new stressors to emerge, and those stressors need to have some structure put around how to deal with them. So things like visual hierarchy, oral hierarchy, relationships between who gets to use what when. They sound like simple things, but when you aggregate that across the scale of a large new investment, these deserve time to be properly set up and properly managed. And then there are a number of environmental adjustments. That's the fourth character, the health and well-being icon, right? From the work that CDE has done over the years, and that many of us continue to refer to, we know the importance of the physical environment on our long-term health and well-being. I know that there were sessions earlier today that unfortunately I couldn't dial into where this was being discussed. But I think that one of the key takeaways here is that we are seeing an increasing level of attention that needs to be paid to the way that the workplace supports health and well-being, and increasing concerns and awareness from those occupants of the space on how they need to be more mindful of their own personal health and well-being in that workspace. And then lastly, the issue that came up was one of change management and communication. There were a number of concerns that came from people simply not knowing what was happening or being aware of how the changes that were being made to create a new environment would impact them, the timing. And faculty and staff don't really react very well to that, nor do any of us. We want to kind of know the milestones that are coming down in our work life and how we best integrate those. So as we look across the three projects, we saw in all three, whether on the front side of planning for the latter two, or in the pre and post occupancy for Mission Hall, these 5 categories consistently were raised, and it seemed like those were pretty straightforward in some cases, pretty nuanced in a few, but easily understood. However, when we started looking at the context of the three, this is where something's happening here question comes up. There were contradictions in the context that suggested greater complexity than what we were seeing in these results. So for Mission Hall, we had the limited pre and post occupancy, limited because we were not able to do a pre-occupancy survey for a range of reasons. It's a new facility on a new campus. All 5 of those categories that we just went through identified needed improvements, and the responses were pretty negative. And we expected that. However, when we went to Building 33, we had a combination of existing and new facilities, both an old and a new campus. Again, improvements across those categories, but a mix of positive and negative responses. And this was unexpected because the quality of the facility that these individuals were coming from was pretty bad. It was pretty bad. And then lastly, Dsfg, same sort of thing. All old facilities, quite old facilities, in fact, a very old kind of rundown part of campus. And again, while we expected quite negative responses, given the quality of those existing facilities, we had a mix of response sets. And I know I've got just about a couple more minutes to go here. I'll wrap up and we can talk about what this means. So the interesting things that came up were, regardless of where they were coming from, 1 or 2 study response groups had significant commentary about Mission Hall, whether to describe their experience with it, I've been there, I don't like it, or to express concern about avoiding being like that. I don't want to be like Mission Hall. Even when the functionality of their existing environments those functions were poor, they expressed more positive feedback about those environments than the perception of what it would be like if they had to move to a place like Mission Hall. So this was an unexplained dichotomy. And the question was, is their perception of loss of my space, loss of time because I have to go to this new campus, loss of the campus culture, whatever your XX is that perception considered riskier than living within the limited functionality of the existing context? And we asked whether or not perception of loss could be a predictor of workplace satisfaction, and if so, whether programming for new facilities for a functional fit would even solve the problems given the potential impact of this perceived loss. And if this were to be the case, what would that mean for the planning for new facilities when in fact this perception of loss was stronger than functional fit? You know, we weren't set up to ask about perception of loss in our analysis, so we looked at several proxies. We asked, well, could the loss of a workstation be measured by looking at, I was in a workstation, or I was in an office, I'm moving to a workstation. Or we did ask questions about commute time, so loss of personal time could be inferred. We asked about moving from campuses, so loss of campus life could be inferred. And these were all things that were discussed in the qualitative data as well. But we felt as a research team that these were all inferences and not direct questions. So the best that we could do was test some proxies. And what we had was the perception of being valued by UCSF and questions of, does your workplace support the work that you need to do? And when the research team looked at the statistics, combining all of the data sets from all 3 studies around the same question set in a mediation analysis, that the net effect was that there was a partial mediation found between the functionality of individual workspace and overall satisfaction. So functionality was predictive of overall satisfaction. Functionality was significantly predictive toward feelings being positive toward UCSF. Feelings toward UCSF were significantly predicting of overall satisfaction, and there was partial mediation. But it wasn't enough. So then we asked, well, does this perceived university support for personnel influence a known relationship between functionality of space and satisfaction? And what we found in looking at a regression analysis was that visual privacy and acoustics, no surprise, right, were 55% of the variation satisfaction. Functionality was 12%, and feelings toward UCSF explained 5% of the variation. So where did we end up? We ended up with open questions. We don't feel like we have the answer here, but we also don't feel like this is a resolved issue. So if we still have the question on the table, whether the perception of loss is a predictor of workplace satisfaction, and if so, what can be done to address concerns of occupants while also working within capital and organizational limitations? And then if so, will programming new facilities for functional fit ever solve to this problem? If not, what can be done? So that's where we are now, and the last slide is, what are we going to do about this? We think that in tuning up this research design for future studies, we need to have more direct queries on perceptions of loss because of this emergent issue in the data. We want to continue to work with the technical criteria team and the design planning team to sensitize them to these issues. And then we also want to work with the university to see if there's an opportunity to do broader engagement surveys. There are many staff surveys now, but there are no faculty engagement surveys. So these are 3 potential next steps for the work. And we'd be happy to take any advice you have about integrating this into future work or any questions that you have right now.
Questions? If anyone has any?
This is like the 3rd session in which this issue of offices to urban trend and people have been saying, oh, people will be so much more productive if they can talk to each other and everything is open? Or is it actually because they want to see how many people they can cram into a smaller space and save money?
Okay. Janice, can you hear me?
I can, and I heard that question great. I think it's a combination of two things. One is there are a lot of conversations, and I really wish that there were recordings for today, but there are a lot of conversations, as you know, about the potential for open to equal collaborative, and we know from the literature that that is not the case. However, that doesn't dissuade the conversation. So motivation around collaboration is a missing piece of this dialogue, well as the financial cost, the cascading consequence of not having a good functional fit. However, I think that the literature in this area, particularly around academic work settings, is quite limited. Many of us, as well as many of the academic faculty at UCSF, have done research to try to track down what's relevant to an academic environment by comparison to what's published about a corporate environment. Very, very different users. Piece is, when we look at academic environments and the investments that are made, there has to be a conversation about carrying costs. So on one hand, you might say, there's a real need to always have a place for faculty to go and be able to focus, always have a place for staff to be able to focus, particularly those dealing with medical issues and patient privacy, those sorts of things. On the other hand, if you look at utilization patterns, you have to say, well, how often is that? Is it typical for faculty members to use a space 50% of the time, 75% of the time, 20% of the time? And there are very few baselines on that are available. So I think on the one hand, you have financial pressure, as you said, to try to optimize the investment to get the most value for the dollar. And on the other hand, we have a shortcoming on the literature to show us whether or not these types of environments cost more than they say when you look at the cascading consequences, or if in fact they're going to be okay if they're modified slightly. I think that everyone would say that there's a modification from Mission Hall that's coming, but what that modification is still is to be determined.
Me? Yeah. Did you look at any of Daniel Kahneman's work on loss aversion and how people overweight losses twice the amount as gains at all?
No. This was not part of our initial literature review. We didn't see this coming. Maybe we should have, but we didn't see this coming. But I would love to get that reference from you, Lindsay. Could you get that reference from me?
Absolutely. Sure.
Because we know that we have work to do here, and if there's a study that would help us to see this differently, we would welcome it. I'm so grateful for your feedback.
And good news too, Janice, all of the talks today are being recorded and they'll be posted on YouTube, so you can
Good.
check that out. Any other questions? Okay. Cool. All right, well, thank you so much, Janice. I'm glad you guys
Appreciate your patience, and I can't wait to hear everyone else's talks on YouTube. Have a nice afternoon there.
You too. Bye-bye.